Welcome back to the show, folks. We have a fantastic show for you today. Once again, this is going to be one of those ones where you're going to want to grab a pen and a paper. If you or anyone you know is in need of any kind of regenerative work, this is the man you want to get some information from. His name is Dr. Ian White. He's a leading researcher in this field, and he has some jaw-dropping bombs to share with us. So before we jump in, of course, I want to thank you guys, and I'd love to direct your attention to natnidham.com. That's my website. That's where you will find information about the membership community. That is also where you will be able to sign up for my newsletter and all that kind of stuff. And also, if you're looking to follow me on social media, that's Natalie Nidham on Instagram. Now, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a listener of this podcast. Thanks to you guys, we have grown in leaps and bounds over the last year and are able to spread this incredible information with bigger and bigger numbers of people. What do you get when you combine a regenerative medicine PhD, an entrepreneurial leap of faith, and a fascination with lobsters that apparently never age? You get Dr. Ian White, our guest today, and the founder of Neobiosis. We cover everything from expanding stem cells for cancer recovery to why pregnancy might just be nature's most powerful anti-aging hack. Oh, and if you've been hearing buzz about exosomes or plasma exchanges, Ian's here to clear up the science and the sales hype. Buckle up. This one goes deep. Hey, folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Dr. Ian White, welcome to the show. It is a pleasure to finally make this happen.
Yeah, it's been a while. We've been talking about this for a few years now. So excited to finally be on here with you.
Yeah, I think it's been 2 years since we first met at A4M.
I think we first met in Palm Beach at a masterclass with Ross Carter. He'd organized.
Get out. We met there?
Yep, that was
it has been a while. All right, folks. Well, listen, you know what? The best things are worth waiting for. And this was definitely worth waiting for. And we're going to talk about a topic today that is so hot. And, regenerative medicine space it's exploding, right? And this is the space you're in. But before we launch into the meat, let's talk a little bit about you and talk about, your background originally is academia, research and academia. And at some point you woke up one morning and decided, yeah, this is all great, but I'm going to be an entrepreneur now. And we were just talking about how you didn't realize it at the time, but it's really jumping out of the fire into the frying pan, as it were. Yeah. But what made you make that switch? Like, what was your life like in academics, and what made you kind of think you wanted to move over?
Well, life in academia was pretty tough. I had a family, 2 kids, living in Miami towards the end of my sort of academic life. And you don't get paid a lot as a postdoc, and cost of living is very high. So, it's very challenging. And what ends up happening is you spend most of your time writing grants, trying to get your research funded. And what I was finding was that my research was considered sort of too fringe. It was sort of too out there to get funded, which is a shame because, a lot of my research has translated since then, and we've done very well with a lot of the research. But at the time, it was just impossible to get funded. So I sort of looked for alternate sources of funding. I couldn't really find anything, so I thought, maybe I'll just raise bunny rabbits. I don't know. I didn't know really what to do for a while. But I was at A4M, and I saw several companies that were selling regenerative products. At that time, they were calling them stem cells. And I wondered, what is it how are they translating this already? Because I've been working with these kinds of tissues for years, and I know the regenerative potential for them, but I didn't know that you could actually translate it already. And so I started looking into that. I started testing the products that were on the market, and I realized that these are the exact same sorts of things that we've been working with, but made it a much poorer quality. So I thought, well, maybe I should do this. Maybe, I have the expertise. I have a PhD in regenerative medicine. I've been studying these tissues for a long time. I see they have a retail potential and they seem to be doing good in the market. What if we could make them better? And what if we could have transparency and then work with the regulators to see if we could make this more mainstream? And that was it. That's how I dedicated my time after that. And ever since, I've been working with regulators. I've been working with our company and other companies to bring transparency, to bring understanding to this field so that we can allow the general public to have access to these amazing resources.
Yeah, that's incredible. So in your time, in academia, you did some pretty, like you developed a method to expand autologous hematopoietic stem cells, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so let's start there. Like autologous meaning they come from your own body, hematopoietic stem cells, expanding those cultures. And I remember a number of years ago, there was a big fight about expanding these stem cell cultures and how it was actually not allowed. And I don't know if it still isn't in the US, that basically the FDA was saying, as soon as these stem cells are removed from the body, if they're manipulated in any way, they're off. And so then people would go to Panama or Mexico and still do.
Right.
They go overseas, they travel for these treatments. So maybe tell us a little bit about this whole hematopoietic stem cells and what you had said to me before we started recording, which was if you're using stem cells, then you have to do this in order for them to be of any use. So off you go.
So most of what you were referring to there were allogeneic cells. So cells from another person, often isolated from the bone marrow and then culture expanded. So they're put in a Petri dish and a plastic dish with growth factors, and their numbers are allowed to expand, and then they harvest those. And typically the cells that are used for that are MSCs. Now, MSCs used to be called mesenchymal stem cells, but we knew for a very long time that was an inaccurate term because they are not stem cells. Arnold Kaplan, before he passed away, actually changed the name to mesenchymal signaling cells, or some call them stromal cells, because to identify their main function, which is to signal and not to act as a stem cell. So those cells which are culture expanded abroad are typically MSCs. But the problem there is that MSCs are very plastic, meaning that they are able to change their phenotype in a very negative way. Now, what I mean by that is when you culture expand them and they're dividing, they're receiving signals from their environment and they are perhaps dying, or they are changing their protein profile. They're changing their phenotype, the type of cell they are. And if you don't test for them, if you don't test to make sure the cell is the same after it's been culture expanded than it was when you first started, then you could have something very different from where you started that you're giving to patients. And that's the problem typically abroad, is they don't do those tests. And that's why the FDA doesn't like it. Typically, I worked with MSCs for many years, culture expanding them in the lab. And what often happens if you're not careful is they will die and get replaced by fibroblasts, which can look very similar under a microscope. So if you don't do very specific genetic tests or surface marker testing, you actually don't know what you've ended up with. So the FDA was really against using culture expanded MSCs. But what I was doing for my PhD was autologous hematopoietic stem cells. And the key there is that they are notoriously hard to expand, but these are the cells that make your immune system. These are the cells that respond to injury. So these are the cells that you really want to be expanding and mobilizing. But the problem is when you take them out of the body and you try to grow them, they don't grow. They need what's called a feeder layer. And that's a layer of cells underneath them that they sit on, just like in the body. So with the MSCs, they sit on plastic, which is artificial, and it's not the same signals that they receive in the body. These hematopoietic stem cells absolutely require a feeder layer. So they sit on a monolayer of endothelial cells. And endothelial cells are what make up our blood vessels. So they sit on these blood vessels inside the body. And when you culture expand them, they require the signals from the endothelial cells. The problem is endothelial cells can't survive without serum. Right? So we have serum in our blood. And when we culture expand cells, we typically have to add exogenous serum to keep the cells alive. But that serum differentiates the hematopoietic stem cells. So they're no longer stem cells. They start maturing and they lose that stem cell potential, and they become terminally differentiated cells. So mature cells that no longer have the stem cell phenotype. So the key for my research was, how do we keep those endothelial cells alive in the absence of serum so that we can allow the hematopoietic stem cells to expand? And we were able to do that. So my previous boss, my previous PI, Shaheen Rafi, figured out that there was a particular part of a virus that we could use to put in the endothelial cells called E4-ORF1 that would keep them alive. And then I discovered the mechanism by which we could then expand the hematopoietic stem cells. So seeing that for the first time was probably the most remarkable thing that I've ever seen, because hematopoietic stem cells are beautiful in culture. They form this like cobblestone appearance, and we would put GFP in them so we could differentiate them from the other cells in the culture. And it was just absolutely the most beautiful thing when we looked down that microscope for the first time, and we saw massive expansion and non-differentiation of hematopoietic stem cells. We saw so much potential for cancer patients, but also the rest of the world.
Wow, that just kind of gave me chills. I can only imagine the scene in the lab that day. You must have been.
Wasn't a day. It was in the middle of the night, probably around 3 a.m.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Kind of like winning the lottery, only better.
Yeah, I remember my boss calling my wife and saying, "I'm sorry, I have to keep him later." And we were there, the two of us, just like kids, just excited beyond belief that we had seen this.
So, what's come of it? What's been the outcome of that discovery? Because that is a major discovery, and as you're saying, like, these are the cells that are used that will strengthen the. I'm losing my words here, but these will differentiate into those cells that will support proper immune function.
Yeah.
The
first goal was, so actually Cornell commercialized the product, and there was a company span out called Angiocrine, which I believe now is the second largest company in the hematopoietic cell expansion space. But the idea was that, I think it's a 1 in 500, something like that. 1 in 500 cancer patients end up dying due to the chemoablative or radioablative therapy because you destroy the immune system.
Yeah.
When you have that therapy, it not only targets the cancer, but it also destroys your bone marrow. And without your bone marrow, you can't make a new immune system, which is where the immune system comes from. That's where the hematopoietic stem cells live. And so a lot of patients, about 1 in 500, I think, end up dying from infection because they don't have an immune system. And so what we were excited about, and I haven't been following their progress, the idea would be you take some hematopoietic stem cells from their bone marrow before they have the radio or chemical ablation. You culture expand them, they have the therapy, and now you've got this massive population of hematopoietic stem cells that you can now transplant back to the patient so their immune system comes back faster.
Wow. And so you don't know if is this available, or this
is
still...
I've not followed the work. I've been so focused on what we've been doing since then. I haven't been following that work.
All right. Well, we're going to get to that too. So, but the company is Angiocrine, what you were saying, right?
Yep.
Okay. So we'll have to look them up and see what they're up to, because that sounds just so incredibly elegant as a solution, right? I mean, it's this whole idea of tapping back into the body's own system to solve a problem that...
Well, that's how all my breakthroughs and all our most scientific breakthroughs happen. Is you look at nature, you see what nature has done, and then you see what you can learn from it. This particular protein that we're using from the virus uses for its own benefit, and we've just sort of stolen it from the virus and said, hey, that's a good idea, let's do that. So we use that protein, that gene from the virus, we put it into the cell. The cell upregulates AKT1, which is able to allow it to metabolize in the absence of serum, which is critical for its survival. And hey presto, what the virus has tried to do to keep the cell alive while it's killing it, while it's infecting it, has been hijacked by us, the scientists, to do good.
Nice. I like that. Turn the bad guys into good guys. All right. Now let's talk about another one of your projects, this whole the heterochronic parabiosis, which is, I said it, I got it. And parabiosis, I think a lot of people have now heard of parabiosis because of what's his name, Brian Johnson,
Mm.
doing a plasma. I think it's a plasma
Plasma
transfer between
exchange.
him and his son.
Mhm.
But this is a whole other area of regenerative medicine. And maybe can we talk about this a little bit? Is it really all that? Is it what's your take on it? And
Yeah.
you've clearly done some work here.
Yeah, well, so I've been studying regenerative processes for over 20 years. I started really as a parasitologist. I was interested in how parasites interact with the immune system at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine in the UK. And what we sort of found back then, and we didn't really understand what we were looking at, was that certain parasites use exosomes to modulate the host immune system so that they can gain entry and survive. Now, we didn't know what it was back then, but we know now that they were using exosomes, and that sort of started my whole journey on trying to understand signaling and
Mm-hmm.
signaling modalities in the forms of exosomes and other modalities. Um, so after studying that for many years and going down the route of cardiac regeneration and how the hematopoietic stem cell niche is maintained, I got very interested in the aging process because I realized that most of our diseases are associated with aging.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can understand the aging process, then perhaps we can understand disease. And one of those directions led me to heterochronic parabiosis. It was an experiment published several years ago from Harvard University, where they took a young mouse and an old mouse and they sutured them together so they shared a blood supply. And based on my previous research at Harvard and at Cornell, I understood the power of young signals. And if you can take
Mm-hmm.
and harness those young signals, I ended up actually winning an award from the American Heart Association for my work on cardiac regeneration, looking at young signals and their influence on older tissue. But all this sort of came together in my mind, looking at the Comboy's research on heterochronic parabiosis, taking a young individual and an old individual, and somehow that old individual seemed to get younger. So markers of aging came down. Their immune system came back, their hair color came back, grip strength came back, cognitive ability was improved. All of these things that you want to see in a younger individual started happening in these older individuals. And so that sent me down this whole rabbit hole of trying to understand what those young signals are. And then that opened up my current career as a scientist studying longevity and aging.
So when they sutured the mice together, just again, just as did the old mouse get younger and the young mouse get older? Like,
Yeah,
did the
it
signaling
kind of
molecules
averaged
from the
out.
old mouse affect
Yeah.
the? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. So we do seem to accumulate sort of aging molecules. And what's fascinating is that it seems that just simply donating blood is a very cheap and inexpensive way to improve your health span and your lifespan. So just going and donating your blood to the big red truck that goes around is something you can do today to improve your quality of life. So yes, the younger mouse got older and the older mouse got younger, and it's because these young signals in the young mouse were passed to the old mouse, but this old stuff that's hanging around in the older mouse is accumulating now in the younger mouse and accelerating their aging.
And so when you're donating blood, so you're not bringing in any youth signals, but you're reducing your load of
Yeah.
of aging signals.
Yeah. So
And
typically what these guys do when they have a plasma exchange is they'll reduce their blood volume by a certain amount and then replace it with the same amount, but younger blood or plasma.
and so isn't but okay, but wouldn't you reject somebody else's plasma? Like it's not like because
It has to be
blood is a
matched.
tissue.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's why he's using his sons, because they're matched. So when you donate blood, they look for your HLA type. And, if you're an O or an A, a B, all of these markers they look for so that when the blood is donated and it's utilized in the hospital, they can call for the matching blood type. So it's the same idea. You can't
same
just take
idea.
anybody's blood unless it comes from a cord. So an umbilical cord actually has this hematopoietic stem cell population that can recapitulate a bone marrow after ablation. And so that's used routinely in medicine, where you would take a cord from a completely unrelated individual. You won't have to HLA match, but you can use it, and you don't need to worry about rejection for the most part.
And repopulate a person's bone marrow.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so How and is this available? Parabiosis of younger, is this a commercially available process? But I don't consider Brian Johnson. He's doing what he's doing, accessing things that other people can't access. Is this something that somebody could do today?
Yeah. Several years ago, there were some early adopting companies out there that the FDA sort of tried to reel in. There's some articles out there about it, but more recently, there are some companies that have done a lot of research, and I would say probably are more advanced than the initial companies that were out there. But yes, you can find opportunities to do plasma exchange. I'm not sure about in the United States, but certainly abroad.
Wow, that's amazing. And so have you or anybody else identified what those aging markers are? Like those signaling molecules that are flipping the phenotype from old to new to young? Do we know what those are, or is it still
That's
kind of
that,
a bit of a soup?
that's a multi-billion-dollar, if not trillion-dollar question.
Yeah.
That's what we're all working on.
Yeah.
So, everybody that's working in longevity research, geroscience, that's what we're trying to find is what's the switch? What makes you young and me old? What
Hmm.
is that thing? And, I'm writing a book right now. I've been writing it for a couple of years now. Unfortunately, just been so busy with everything else, I haven't quite got to finish it. But I believe I understand the answer, or at least where to look.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where my research is going now. We don't know the answer. I know the answer exists. I know because we see it in nature. We see
Right.
it all the time happening in nature. I'm happy to talk about that as well. But I believe that it's something that is findable.
Where do we see it in nature?
We see it in other species like lobsters that don't seem to have any markers of aging. So a lobster will just continue to grow and get bigger and bigger, but you wouldn't know by looking at its biology whether it was a 1 year old or a 30-year-old
No
lobster.
kidding.
They
So
have
they
no
never
markers.
die?
They only die through disease, predation, or they get so large the energy required to molt is in excess of the energy they have available, and so they die under their own weight. So
Wow.
that's really how lobsters die. They don't die of aging. Same thing with a buffalo carp. A 30-year-old buffalo carp will be just as fecunded as a young carp. It can sire or mother babies just as easily as a 1 year old, and they don't show any markers of aging either. Teratopsis dornii, we call the immortal jellyfish. They can
Mm.
live over 5,000 years without, appearing to age. They actually de-differentiate their cells. They become babies again and then become adults. So, there are
Oh my
those
God.
examples in nature, but in the human body, we see examples all the time. So not only did Shinya Yamanaka win the Nobel Prize in 2012 for these iPS cells that he developed, these Yamanaka factors that are able to de-differentiate mature keratinocytes, mature skin cells, back to an embryonic-like state. That shows the mechanism is possible, but we see it every single day in childbirth. Right? So we can take a 40-year-old male and a 40-year-old female who have 40-year-old cells. She has 40-year-old eggs. He has 40-year-old sperm stem cells, which generate new spermatids regularly, but still it's coming from old cells. When it comes together to make a baby, it makes a 0-year-old baby. So
Yeah.
all of those markers, all of that aging that's happening in our body that accumulates in us to push us towards death is erased when you start again with a new baby. So the mechanism exists. We just got to understand how to find it.
Holy jumping. That's crazy. Never thought of it that way. That's
Yeah.
wild. Um, okay. So my head's exploding right now. It is amazing, right? I mean, it's like you already know so much and you're so close, but it's like the last 5 pounds, that last inch to the finish
Yeah.
line
It's
to
the same as breast milk, right? We know a lot about breast milk, but formula is not like breast milk. There's
nothing like
just
it.
that little je ne sais quoi. There's that certain something in breast milk that we just don't understand because we don't know what to measure. If
Yeah.
we don't know what's in it, we don't know what to measure. And it's kind of like that with these products that we're studying. And the issue is that it's great that labs like Altos Labs are raising $5 billion to do research, but labs like ours are struggling to raise capital, even though we have deployed countermeasures already into the marketplace that are changing and saving lives. Raising capital for us is really, really hard. And
Why?
Uh, I don't really know. I think it's that people like to bet on horses they think are going to win. And when you've got momentum like Altos Labs, you want to put your money into something like that. I don't really know. It's a really difficult play. But I've got theories that don't necessarily align with what everybody's doing at Altos. But when you're fighting a war, you need to fight on multiple fronts. But
Mm-hmm.
it seems that my ideas that I've been developing over the past few years are gaining traction because I hear a lot of other people now talking about my theory. My theory isn't my theory. My theory has evolved over the years. I'd love to talk about that a little bit in a minute as well, if
Yeah,
possible.
for sure.
But this idea that entropy is driving aging is something that I came up with a few years ago. Unbeknownst to me, that was a theory that had existed, way back in the 40s with Erwin Schrödinger when he wrote "What Is Life." But I sort of re-envisioned it, and I've been talking about this for a few years now. And there seems to be a lot of other people talking about the physics of aging as opposed to the biology of aging. And I believe that's where the answer is going to lie.
In the physics. So what's entropy? Why don't you tell what is that?
Yeah,
Like,
so entropy is sort of how we tell time. Entropy
okay.
is the universe can only move in one direction, and that's to go from a state of order to disorder. And that's just a basic law of physics. And so the second law of thermodynamics says that in an enclosed space, entropy can only increase. So things can only happen; they can't unhappen. So
Right.
if you evolve into a galaxy, that galaxy can't de-evolve back into basic matter or anything.
Isn't
So
that what a black hole is though?
yeah, so a black hole is maximum entropy. So it's gone to a
Okay.
point where you can't go any further. And what's called the heat death of the universe will occur when all the work, the chemical work in the universe has been done, and everything is now in one black hole.
Hmm.
So that's sort of where we're heading. That's the direction we're heading. So entropy in the body is the accumulation of disorder, essentially. It's a very complex idea, but simply put, when we are born, for example, we don't have much methylation to talk of on our DNA, and that methylation sort of turns on and turns off genes and everything. But
Yeah.
as we age, our epigenetics changes, and there are markers out there. There are whole companies based
Hmm.
around looking at those markers to gauge how old you are. They're doing epigenetic
Yeah.
aging and clocks, and
Hmm.
so that accumulation is a demonstration of entropy. There are other demonstrations of entropy in the body too, but that demonstration of entropy means that this is something that's happened that can't be undone. Right? It's the cell is aging, and either the cell has to die or it becomes senescent, and we start this whole sort of aging process.
Okay. So when we talk about reversing aging or reversing biological aging, what we're really trying to do is get rid of those senescent cells, trigger autophagy, mitophagy, all the autophagies to kind of get rid of the damaged stuff
Yeah.
and generate new cells, new mitochondria, new material that hasn't sustained that damage. We're not actually demethylating DNA.
Well, we don't know. We don't know what the answer is, but we know that whatever you just described is the thing that happens to babies. When you have a blastocyst form from
Uh-huh.
the meeting of two gametes, those cells do something to reset themselves because they've come from older cells. So it's
Right.
not
So they
just
reset their clock. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
reset their clock. So it's not just stripping senescent cells; it's also stripping the entropy that's in the cells themselves. Because you can't just remove every cell in your body and start over. And you could theoretically remove all of the senescent cells, but what about all the cells that are non-senescent but are highly methylated or have epigenetic changes that mean that they're not signaling efficiently enough, that as we get older, our immune system becomes compromised. It just doesn't work as well. But if we
Hmm.
give young signals, we're able to reinvigorate that immune system, which suggests we can somehow reset it, not by just removing senescent cells, but something fundamental in our immune system, in our immune stem cells, perhaps in our hematopoietic stem cells, that can reset or at least be cleared off in some
Hmm.
fashion,
Yeah. That's
simply put.
fascinating. I mean, you still want to get rid of some of the sin. I mean, you
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
take
yeah,
out
yeah.
you want
Yeah,
to
I mean,
take
you want
out
a
of the
clean house.
garbage, really. Just,
You would want a clean house,
yeah.
but the difference between what everybody's doing right now, as far as biohacking and longevity and health span interventions, is basically improving the quality of life. We probably can get up to about 120 years out of our lifespan, but that's a hard ceiling, it seems, for our biology. What I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to do is understand why that is. So I'm not trying to improve the quality necessarily during that period. I'm trying to understand, how do we get to 150 and 200 years? Because if we can understand that and get there, that means that we've fundamentally understood this aging process, and perhaps we could still live to 100, but we live to 100 as a 30-year-old.
Yeah, that would be awesome. For me, it's like, don't take me to 200 until you can tell me you can take me to 200. So, and I still feel good.
Exactly.
And,
There's no
and
point being 200, but being, crippled.
no,
But
even 100,
that's
right?
the fundamental difference with our research, is that we're not just trying to push out the lifespan. We see a lot of research coming out right now, especially in mice, which, doesn't typically translate to humans anyway. But it's
No.
just like, let's see how much longevity we can get, see how we can push the lifespan out. But, these mice are really rickety by the end. They look terrible for the most part. So that's not interesting to us. What's interesting to me is to say, what did I do differently as a teenager that I'm not doing as a 50-year-old? And how do I tap back into that? Because the genes are the same. They're all still in my body,
Yeah.
but they're being
They've been
expressed.
silenced. Yeah.
So, the body knows how to heal. It's done it its whole life. And it also knows how to reset, because when I have children, they were born at 0 years old. Their cells were 0 years old. So I want to understand that, so I can say, I can turn it on, I can turn it off, I can turn it up, I can turn it down. So if you say 30s were my best, I felt my healthiest in my 30s, we turn it up to 30 and you stay at 30. That's my goal. How practical that is, we don't know, but all of the indicators in biology suggest that it's possible. And like I said before, I take all of my research inspiration from nature. If it exists in nature, it means it's physically possible in our universe. We're not breaking physical laws. It exists. We just need to understand it and how to apply it to humans.
I'm still struggling with the whole lobster doesn't age problem. You've already blown my mind. I mean, you've kind of blown my mind in a few places here, but that's fascinating. Okay. So, wow, I didn't even think we were going to be here. I mean, here we are. Now I'm trying to figure out how we going to get back to exosomes and growth factors. So from a practical perspective right now, so there are companies or organizations that are offering this plasma exchange to people, like what Brian Johnson is doing. And there's legitimacy there, clearly. Yeah. And within that, there was another procedure that a bunch of the big names did. I think it was in Mexico, where they had some kind of I can't remember the name of it, but their blood was filtered. And that was a mechanism, it sounds like, of removing some of these aging factors from the blood. And just from reducing that load, they would experience benefits. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So,
okay, good.
That kind of filtering system is very expensive. It was, I think, developed in Germany, if I remember correctly. And there are some facilities closer to home. There's a facility in the Bahamas that offers that service. It's very expensive, but the results do seem very promising. So, for the time being, until we figure out what that switch is that I was talking about, the best we can do are some of these modalities that are synergistic with one another. So removing blood from your body or filtering your blood, taking in young signals. You mentioned Brian Johnson using the plasma exchange. He's getting it from a younger individual, but there are younger individuals you can get it from. And so in our research, what we realized was that pregnancy is a natural form of heterochronic parabiosis. You have a young individual, a baby, sharing blood and nutrients with an older individual, the mother, and the baby's using these signals to grow, and the mother's using these signals to improve her health too, right? So a mother is probably at a peak health during pregnancy due to the signals she's receiving from the baby to deal with all these rigors of pregnancy. The baby wants her to be healthy. And
her older signals, like her aging signals, is what's triggering the maturing of that baby in a way.
Yeah, I don't know if I would necessarily take it that far, but certainly growth factors and immunoglobulin and things like that are being passed to the baby that are benefiting the baby. But
Yeah.
the exosomes that the baby's producing enter the blood supply of the mother and change her physiology too. So
Huh.
her heart increases in volume, her hair quality improves, her skin
Hmm.
quality improves.
Yeah.
Pregnant women glow. It's
Yeah.
from these signals from the baby. So these exosomes are what contain the majority of these young signals. They carry what's called cargo, and in that cargo are some of the instruction manuals and the growth factors and everything else that the body needs to heal itself. So when we talk about a plasma exchange between a 50-year-old and a 30-year-old, you might see some benefits. But what if you took that young heterochronic parabiosis? The baby's now born, but you can harvest the amniotic fluid. Right? It's typically medical waste. It's thrown away after a typical
Hmm.
C-section. The baby's healthy, the mother's healthy, but you've got this amniotic fluid left over. That's like heterochronic parabiosis. That's like a young plasma exchange. You can take that and use it medicinally, and that's been the basis of our research. We found that by taking the heterochronic parabiosis of pregnancy in the form of purified amniotic fluid, that we can, when we apply it to a disease state, we can remove or reverse the disease state. Whether that's a
That's
burn,
incredible.
whether that's a diabetic ulcer that's not responding to any conventional medicine, and the
Yeah.
patient's going to have the limb removed, you apply this product, the tissue ages as if it's a baby and it regenerates.
That's incredible. What I'm sitting here thinking, like when you talk about amniotic fluid, like how amazing would it be for at right there at the delivery for the mother to get an infusion of that amniotic fluid back to herself to help her recover and heal from
Yeah.
delivery and having this baby, and
And the
dad could get a
scars.
little bit just for a little extra shot.
No, I mean that's an area that we're interested in pursuing and going into banking.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting area because if you think about it, a lot of women suffer from things like postpartum depression
Hmm.
and other postpartum issues, and we think that a lot of that is due to this sort of cold turkey
Yeah.
withdrawal of the amniotic fluid. She's been
Yeah.
bathed in this stuff for months. And then suddenly she goes through this traumatic experience and she no longer has this immunomodulatory, goodies in her body. And the inflammation can cause depression, in the brain. And we've seen stroke patients recover after an IV infusion of these products because it brings down the inflammation in their brain. As long as they don't have
Yeah.
brain
Yeah.
damage, if it's just inflammation, you can bring it down. And so we're talking with the military, we're talking with the NFL about TBI,
Hmm.
concussions, because that's inflammation. And if you can bring down the inflammation, you can mitigate damage. But same thing with the pregnant mother. If she's withdrawing from the amniotic
Yeah.
fluid, what about if we give it back a couple of weeks later to help her recover?
Yeah. No, I think that, I mean, so many women, like their thyroid goes south after
Yeah,
pregnancy,
very
right? I
quickly.
mean, it's epidemic. That's why thyroid issues, and it's subclinical. It's kind of like this weird under the radar stuff. Okay. Wow. Okay. So an amniotic fluid, does it need to be matched like plasma, or is it's even more naive? So it's
Yeah, it's
less.
acellular. So the matching really comes down to the markers on the surface of the blood cells. So if you have no cells, those markers don't exist. It doesn't mean that the product is immunoprivileged, which means that
Okay.
it's not invisible to the immune system, but it doesn't elicit an immune response like you might if you just took a random adult's blood and injected it into your body.
Right. Right. Okay. Wow. Okay. So amniotic fluid, a whole other source
Yeah.
of rejuvenation, as it were.
And it's where we're focusing our efforts. I worked for many years with MSCs and other modalities, but based on our research, we've discovered that this particular fraction that we work with, called VIX001, that particular fraction is incredibly potent. And we have an IND approved by the FDA right now for a clinical trial with it. So that's very exciting. We're just looking for partners to help us fund the clinical trial. Although we've just been invited to a semi-finalist in the X Prize to join their team, which is very exciting. So we may be able to deploy the product
Congratulations.
as part of the X Prize. Yeah, that's very exciting. But so VIX001, this particular fraction of amniotic fluid, we're able to deploy it across many different modalities, and that's where we're at right now. Is we're understanding, we're trying to understand what's in it, because again, just like breast milk, we know there are exosomes, we know there are over 300 bioactive growth factors. But one thing we've discovered recently, which is very exciting, and you might recognize this word, chlortho.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
clotho right now is a very exciting protein, and it's being studied extensively in longevity, because what scientists have discovered is that if you block this gene from working in a mouse, the mice die very, very quickly. If you
Mm-hmm.
overexpress this gene in a mouse, they live a lot longer. But what's most exciting is it translates to humans as well, because most research in mice doesn't translate to humans, but this seems to translate to humans. And so this clotho protein that they're calling the longevity protein, that it seems
Yeah.
to have this, life extension and life improving qualities, is abundant in our fraction of purified amniotic fluid. So
Wow.
clotho, as well as the exosomes and everything else. So we don't know how the product works. We just see these remarkable outcomes where we put it on burns and they heal remarkably fast. We put it on diabetic ulcers, and instead of getting amputation, it heals without scarring. We don't know how it's doing it, but when we look at the 400 billion exosomes, over 300 bioactive growth factors, and the clotho, this longevity protein that's present, together, this soup seems to have some kind of magical, I hate to use the word magical, but these really amazing
Yeah.
properties.
Well, this is holy grail stuff, right? Like this is the stuff. This is fountain of youth
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
conversation.
we've saved lives, and we've changed countless lives with these products. Mostly deployed abroad up until recently, but it's
What about in
amazing.
spinal injuries?
We haven't actually looked at that yet. I know that there has been some work done previously with exosomes and spinal injuries. We haven't used our product in that capacity yet. But we are
Wow.
looking at things like Alzheimer's. We are looking at things like TBI. We are, burns, skin wound healing, things like that. So it's a very broad application. Osteoarthritis. We were talking earlier about
Yeah.
arthritis. This immunomodulatory capacity of these products
Mm-hmm.
is able to bring immediate pain relief to a lot of people, and then reduce inflammation. So you're getting,
Did you
remarkable.
get remodeling of the joint, or not quite
We haven't.
that far?
We don't know yet. It's going to take
Okay.
time, but we're hopeful.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. All
That
right.
may
We're going to
require
have to get on.
surgery, but then we use the regenerative medicine on top of the surgery to recover.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's move into, and you mentioned exosomes, you've mentioned growth factors a number of times, and let's talk about exosomes and growth factors, because those are, of all the things we've talked about, are probably the most available to people now.
Yeah.
And before we started recording the podcast, you were expressing some frustration at the nomenclature that gets used in the industry still. People are still talking about getting a stem cell infusion, or and so maybe where we should start is, let's differentiate this whole idea of stem cells, exosomes, and these growth factors, and talk about what, and you've touched on some of it already in our conversation anyway, but let's kind of reposition ourselves so we can then move into this whole exosome and growth factor conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the field that we work in is the field of regenerative medicine. So
Yeah.
we want to regenerate and rejuvenate cells and organs. Now, just like Kleenex is used to describe tissue paper, and vacuums are used to describe, Hoover's used to
Hoover.
describe vacuums.
Yeah.
Stem cells have been used as a catch-all term to describe anything in regenerative medicine. And unfortunately, from a scientific perspective and from a medical perspective, that's very dangerous, because then people have no idea what they're getting.
Yes, exactly.
Patients don't know what they're getting, and for the most part, physicians or healthcare providers don't even know what they're providing their patients, because they hear from sales reps, "Here's our stem cell product; it's the best in the market," yada yada yada. But there's no data that supports it, and the outcomes are often unreported. So the term regenerative medicine is not synonymous with stem cell therapy. In the United States, and actually around the world, in this industry, we do not do stem cell therapy. There are not stem cells in these products. There are stem cells in cord blood, hematopoietic stem cells. So if we're recapitulating the bone marrow, you get stem cells, the bone marrow grows back. But there are no stem cells in Wharton's jelly. There are no stem cells in purified amniotic fluid. MSCs are not stem cells. They were misbranded for a long time. When Arnold Kaplan first described them, he defined them as stem cells because he was seeing multi-lineage differentiation in vitro. And what that means is they were able to become different tissues in a petri dish, but that doesn't happen in the body. So for a long time, we were arguing they are not stem cells. Before he passed away, he made a very big point, published many papers explaining MSCs are not stem cells. They are mesenchymal signaling cells. Their signals are very important in regenerative medicine, but they are not stem cells. So if you're receiving MSCs, you are not receiving stem cell therapy. Stem cell therapy is a misnomer and it doesn't really exist. What does exist are the ability to transfer regenerative outcomes by giving signals to your stem cells. So the stem cells throughout your body can receive those signals and respond. So if we're going to talk about stem cell therapy, what we're really saying is we're giving therapy to your stem cells.
Right. Got it. You're not bringing new stem cells on the job. You're using what you've got and you're giving them different information or instructions.
Yeah. You're giving them the instruction manuals and you're giving them the raw materials. So think about it like building a building, right? If you want to build a building, you need an instruction manual and you need raw materials, bricks and mortar and things like that. That's what these regenerative products do, is we give back to the body the thing that it no longer has because it's turned off the gene. So it no longer has the instructions and it's turned off the other genes that would provide the raw materials. So we're giving that back. The exosome contains the RNA with the instructions, and the milieu around it, the chlorotho, the other growth factors, are the raw materials the body can utilize to respond to those instructions.
So cool. All right. So let's talk about exosomes here, because you just described a package.
Yeah.
And really it's, it's like when my husband throws away the manual for a new thing and I'm like, why would you do that? Now we don't know how to use it, but now we have YouTube. You can find everything on YouTube. Yeah. YouTube is like, the exosome of the world, but let's talk about these exosome treatments. Only it's
a new one.
we don't have enough time to even go down that road, which is not worth it. So let's talk about exosomes that people are getting, because I want to talk about them. And then there's new products out there right now that are saying we're not exosomes. What we are the signaling. And I'm not even sure on the language they're using, but we're the signaling molecules. We've broken open the exosome and we've released you're nodding, which means you know what I'm sort of trying to talk about here. Maybe we can differentiate between those two, because I think what's happening is as this is growing and expanding, you get people that kind of pick stuff up along the way and go, okay, we can do something with this. Yeah. And they just go off and commercialize it. Meanwhile, you're back in the trenches going, yeah, but we haven't figured it all out yet.
Yeah. I mean, there's taking bold steps, and then there's just being careless. And unfortunately, there's a lot of careless groups out there. But for anybody that doesn't understand what an exosome is, I'll just give a quick sort of definition and explanation of an exosome. So all of the cells in the body communicate to each other, and there are different ways they can communicate. They can communicate locally or over long distances. Now, when a cell is communicating over long distance, that's called a paracrine signal. And in order to do that, the signals have to navigate all of the different enzymes in the body that want to break those signals down, because we don't want loose signals just going around the body causing tumors or anything like that, right? So we have enzymes in our body that look out for proteins and things that shouldn't be there or around, and they gobble them up and they're gone. So when a cell wants to communicate to a cell a long distance away, it takes those signals and packages them inside a bubble of lipid. This phospholipid bilayer that's called an exosome, and it makes billions of them, and it releases them out of the cell into the bloodstream or into the interstitial space. The exosomes can move around, and on their surface they have markers, and those markers are like a FedEx package address. So we take that FedEx package, this is the analogy, we package it with our information that we want to share with another cell, we put the address label on it, and then we send it out. So as that exosome is moving around the body, those markers that are on the surface are looking for compatible receptors. And when it finds them, it then delivers the cargo into that cell. So if you've got an inflamed cell, if you've got a senescent cell, if you've got some injury happening and the exosomes are floating around there, those inflammatory markers will allow the exosomes to adhere and then release their cargo, their information into the cell that needs it. And then in addition, you have these signals from the amniotic fluid that give the cell then the raw material that it needs in order to respond to those signals. Of course, there's some
Wow.
raw material in the exosome too. So it's able to make its own raw material. So that mRNA that's in the package goes into the cell and it can make copies of itself. It can make copies of the protein that's needed. So exosomes are the products from cells. They are not cells themselves. They are not stem cells. I know a lot of people say, come get stem cells, and what they're actually giving them are exosomes.
Exosomes.
But again, not all exosomes are created equal. So, as I said, all cells in your body make exosomes. But do you want old hepatic exosomes, which are sending signals A, B, or C around the body? Or do you want young fetal exosomes that are saying, grow new tissue, grow new blood vessels, modulate inflammation? Those are the signals. Those are the instructions you want. And that's what we can get from the amniotic fluid, are those young signals packaged inside those young exosomes being given then to a patient so they can utilize them.
So what you're saying is, what if you're getting if you're in a clinic and they're offering you an exosome infusion, what you want to make sure, I mean, there's lots of things you want to make sure, but you want to make sure that those exosomes were derived from amniotic fluid
Perinatal
and
tissue,
not
yeah.
where else, or
Ideally amniotic
amniotic
fluid, but
tissue.
yeah. Birth
Where else
tissue.
would they come from?
The placenta, you can purify the placenta and you can remove them. You can purify the umbilical cord and remove them. But the majority you're going to get are from the amniotic fluid. So it's a really good source. But, there are a lot of companies out there that don't really know what they're doing. And so while they may claim to have exosomes, they perhaps do not. Or perhaps they say we've got lyophilized product, which means freeze dried. But
Yeah.
what they don't realize is that when you freeze dry membranes, so an exosome has a membrane just like a cell. When you freeze dry it, it cracks open and it's destroyed. And there are a lot of proteins that are soluble, that are floating around, that denature. When you freeze dry something, these proteins unfold and they can't refold again. So freeze drying never really works. When somebody has a freeze dried product injected into them, sometimes they might say they've seen improvement, but that improvement typically is similar to receiving PRP, which is from your own blood. It's the platelets from your own blood. And the way they work is by forming an irritation. You inject that into somebody's injury, it elicits an immune response, an irritation, which then the body responds to try to fix. So it's not really regenerative medicine. You're still using your own immune system and no other additional goodies. And that's sort of how these damaged lyophilized products work. They form an irritation and you're just sort of relying on your own immune system to fix you, not taking these young signals like you would if you were using perinatal products.
That is fascinating. So, well, yeah, because now you no longer have the envelope with the address on it.
Yeah, everything's destroyed. So now it's just debris. And when
So
you
now
have
you've
debris,
just got stuff.
yeah, so it's just stuff, and the body doesn't like having stuff floating around, so it elicits an immune response. I always give the analogy of a dog licking a wound. The old wives' tales where if you fell over and scraped your elbow, have your dog lick it because it heals faster. And it seems to. And that's because it elicits an immune response because of all those particles that are in the saliva of the dog get into the wound. It elicits a stronger immune system, so it technically should heal faster. But that's not regenerative medicine. You don't want to be paying hundreds or thousands of dollars just to have an irritant injected into your body. Why not have an actual regenerative medicine that gives your body the resources and tools to actually heal without a scar, to actually reduce pain, to actually elicit a regenerative response?
Wow. Okay. So on the exosome front, one of the things we talked about before we hit record was all exosomes are not made equal, or all exosome products that are available on the market right now are not made equal. Can you help people to understand how they even begin to know what questions to ask to make sure that what they're being offered is what they want?
It's a really good question. And that's the issue that's plaguing this entire industry right now, is that for most people, it's almost impossible to know what you're getting. Physicians often are undereducated when it comes to their product because they rely on the honesty of their sales rep, and the sales rep is typically motivated by sales. And so, they hear certain buzzwords. They don't really understand the science behind it. So they use the words the physician responds best to. The physician thinks he's getting X, Y, and Z when really he's getting A, B, and C. He's getting nothing at all, perhaps. And then the patient doesn't ask the questions, trusts the doctor and receives the therapy, maybe doesn't have any outcome, and then blames the doctor or blames the technology and says, I went for exosomes and they didn't work. This whole industry is snake
Snake
oil.
oil.
So, but in some cases there is a lot of junk on the market. There is a lot because these companies are owned by previous sales reps, or they're owned by businessmen that don't understand the science. They just want to make the money because this industry is exploding. But
It is.
I'm a PhD. My partner is an MD, the Dean Emeritus of the University of Miami Medical School. Together, we have a reputation to maintain, and we also have an ethical responsibility. And so we only provide products that are vetted appropriately, that are safe, tested for infectious disease appropriately, tested for sterility, genetically tested as well. Even though it's acellular, we're testing the mother's genetics to make sure there are no genetic abnormalities. And then we are able to deploy the products in a way that we know is safe and effective. We know we have stuff in it. We know that stuff is regenerative, and here are the outcomes because we're publishing them. So what physicians need to be asking are things like, are you FDA registered? Has the FDA inspected your lab? Now, things like that are going to be complicated as well, because if you are FDA inspected in this field, you will receive a warning letter because the FDA does not allow and like these therapies. We've received a warning letter. Everybody else in the industry has received a warning letter or will receive a warning letter if they haven't received one yet. And that's confusing for people because it's like, well, the FDA has sent them a warning letter. How can they be safe? No matter what you do, whether you're the worst of the worst or the best of the best, the FDA treats everybody the same, unfortunately. We all get tarred by the same brush. But the patient and the physician need to be able to differentiate. And the only way that the physician can really do that is to understand whether they're FDA registered, FDA inspected, what were the observations in the warning letter, and go see the lab. If the manufacturer won't tell you who's making the product or where it's being made, where the lab is, and doesn't invite you to come and take a tour of the lab, that's a major red flag, because a lot of these companies that are making millions of dollars, they have a lab in somebody's garage. When the FDA sort of catches up with them, they close that lab down and open up another one, and they've got another 2 or 3 years where they can keep making junk and making money, and nothing seems to happen to them. And that happens all the time. So if they don't let you go see the lab, you shouldn't be buying the product.
Wow. So you're talking to the physician now.
Talking to the physician. The patient is at a disadvantage because they don't really know how to ask those questions. They don't really have access to the manufacturer, and they wouldn't probably know how to understand the information they received anyway. But
you can make sure that your physician is asking those questions.
Right. Yes, that's what they can do. They can make sure by asking the physician, have you visited the lab? Have you inspected the lab? Where is the lab? Who's making the product? I have a PhD in regenerative medicine. I've been at the bench 20 years, but I've walked into labs where they have techs that are out of high school or college with no experience, and they're following a recipe that was found online or something. You can't make products like that. Yeah, I just came back from a presentation where I showed a series of photographs that we had taken inside competing labs, and showed the types of incubators they were using, the types of the tech was in street clothing, street shoes. They had lab coats instead of full scrubs. The hood they were using was right next to the lunch area and everything. It's like these things are happening right now, and unless the physician is in there looking to see whether they are CGMP compliant, they have good documentation, they appear to, I put a photograph of my lab and this other lab, side by side, and like, these guys are at A4M and other places like that with booths and selling product. This is our lab. Look at the difference. Our lab looks like a surgical suite because that's how it should be.
Wow.
Not just somebody's closet.
Okay. All right. So let's say we've asked the right questions and we've got the right stuff. What can we expect from exosomes and the associated growth factors and all the cargo that's in the exosome? So you already mentioned a reduction in inflammation, a modulation of the immune system, which is how the reduction in inflammation has. Is there more? Like, is there regeneration that is possible? Is there what are the type, I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, what are the types of conditions that people should be thinking about exosomes for?
Yeah, well, let's use the example of burns. We've published on that where we had a firework incident, and a woman had second and third degree burns on the back of her leg. She was in 10 out of 10 pain. Immediately put on opioids, and as you know, we've
Mm-hmm.
got a major opioid problem in this country. The physician thought that her recovery would take 2 to 3 months and require extensive skin grafting. The physicians applied the product topically, and within 6 days, the injuries were almost completely gone. Within 30 minutes of applying the product, her pain was from 10 out of 10 to 2 out of 10.
Come
So,
on.
yeah, so we reduced the pain, we reduced the inflammation. The paper's published, so I'll be happy to share it with you. It's also on my
Maybe give
LinkedIn
us a
page.
link so that we can post it in the
Yeah,
show notes. That would be great.
and so within 6 days, with no tissue grafting at all, the injuries were almost completely gone. Similar with diabetic ulcers. Now, most diabetic ulcers do not recover, and they're recalcitrant to treatment. So we've had patients that are in hospital receiving every possible treatment for this diabetic ulcer, and it's just growing and growing to a point where they become amputation candidates. So
Mm-hmm.
we can apply this product topically over a period of time, and what we see is that the lesion stops growing, it starts reverting, the blood vessels grow back, the nerves grow back, and the tissue grows back, and it looks like baby soft tissue with no scar. So we're getting regeneration. Not only are we getting immunomodulation and pain reduction, but we're also getting tissue regeneration in examples like this.
That's incredible. Okay, so if somebody listening to this has someone in their life with a diabetic ulcer or a
Bed
major
sores,
burn.
injuries that are not non-healing. We had
So now let's
paradermal
talk about
gangrene.
joints. Like for example, everybody's got a shoulder injury
Yeah, yeah.
or a knee injury. What about in the case of hips? Is it possible that people could either delay or potentially avoid a replacement of a joint? Are we there yet or not quite?
Yeah, that's our hope. When we took IMAC Regeneration Centers public in 2019, that was a big focus of theirs were hip joints and delaying the need for surgery. And they actually had a big wall of canes where somebody would come in on a cane and be a candidate for surgery. And after a course of treatment, rehabilitation, and regenerative medicine, they got to a point where they didn't need their cane anymore. And so either you've eliminated the need for the surgery, or you've perhaps pushed the need for surgery back, because that's a great thing too. If you delay the need for surgery, that also delays the need for a second surgery, because I think
Yeah.
it's greater than 30% of joint surgeries fail. And so at some point, if you get a surgery too early, you may need another surgery in your lifetime. So if you can delay that surgery by 10 or 20 years, maybe you've done yourself a huge favor. But as you
And who
mentioned,
knows what'll come down the pipes in the next 20 to 30 years. I mean, you
if
could
we get
refine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if we get additional funding, we can refine our products even further. Because again, like breast milk, we don't know everything that's in it. We're learning more and more about it. But if we can fund more research to actually find that key thing, perhaps maybe we can make it much more efficient. But again, you mentioned shoulders. I had a major shoulder issue right as we were developing these products, and once they became available, I actually had an injection into my shoulder. I had an impinged nerve. And what the healthcare provider was able to do was, under guidance, use our purified amniotic fluid to hydrodissect the nerve away from the fascia, away from the tissue, which normally would be incredibly painful and extensively painful for a long period of time. But because we injected this product, not only was the pain modulated, but it induced repair, because you're tearing the tissue apart. So it induced repair. So I went from massive agony for months. My pain got worse over a course of 5 or 6 months, to within 2 weeks going from 100% pain down to 10% pain.
Wow. And now your shoulder's great.
Yeah, no, I mean, the impingement was caused by a bone spur, which is still there. So I
Mm-hmm.
still have the occasional discomfort. There's certain positions while I'm sleeping that I can still feel it, but I mean, I can do anything that I want with my shoulder now. It's, I would reach behind and almost throw up with the pain previously.
Yeah. No, I've had that. I mean, not as bad as you, because I didn't need a hydrodissection, but I've
Yeah.
I've been to that movie.
Yeah, these are the
Okay, and then what about the people that are going in and having an IV? So when we're doing an IV of exosomes, assuming that they're good, that it's the right stuff and all that, that's where we're going to be seeing those general immunomodulation benefits. Is it possible that could we say that maybe those types of IVs could regenerate, not regenerate, but get the immune system working better to the point where it's better, more vigilant against certain things like cancer? Like, we can't say that it's anti-cancer, but if we have an immune system that is kind of rebooted and more functional, it kind of follows that it might be able to avoid trouble.
yeah.
I'm
So I'm
trying
not a
not to say anything that's going to land anybody in jail,
Yeah,
but
yeah. I'm going to make a disclosure as well. I'm not a physician, so I can't give any medical advice. I can't recommend
no,
anybody go for IV
of course not.
infusions. But from a scientific perspective, that's sort of where we landed, right? Where the pregnancy is a natural form of heterochronic parabiosis. So if you're taking those young signals and you're putting them into your blood system, it's going to provide those signals to your immune system, to the rest of your body, to everywhere that's perfused throughout your body. It's going to provide those young signals and instruction manuals to theoretically stave off the aging process. If you're receiving signals that allow you to heal more readily, perhaps you're not as achy in the morning. Perhaps that arthritic joint is going to start improving. Perhaps the brain fog is going to improve. Again, I'm not recommending this as a medical intervention. I'm saying from a scientific perspective, these are the types of things that we're studying in the clinic and seeing quite remarkable outcomes.
That's amazing. Okay, well, listen, I could keep asking questions for a really long time. I think what I'm going to do is I want to close with a couple of kind of more thematic questions. But before I ask those, what is your advice to people right now on exosome therapy? Like, what's your best advice to people who are thinking about this? I mean, I think for the most part, you're a thumbs up, but you got to do your homework. So what would be 3 or 4 things you want people to know about exosome therapy if it's accessible to them and they're going to look for it?
Yeah, the most important thing, I think, is that not all exosomes are created equal, like we said. So you've got to do your homework, make sure your physician is aware of who you're buying from. Even ask for the company's name. Demand it. Demand to know who the company is, and then Google them. Find out. Look online and look at their lab outside. You can, and if it looks like a slaughterhouse, probably avoid it. But if it looks like it could have a lab inside, or these are the sorts of things you could do. But demand those things. Demand counts. How many exosomes does it have, and how did they measure them? Oh, well, we don't know how they measured them. That's a red flag. So make sure that your physician has done their diligence on the product. And make sure you're not getting ripped off. A lot of people might go to certain clinics or abroad and pay $30,000-$40,000 for product that nobody understands, where you could go to somewhere in the United States and get an exosome treatment for $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, and that's probably about right. That's the sort of ballpark. But then there are other modalities. Here's another sort of point. Don't just expect exosomes to be a golden bullet. There are other things you have to do, other modalities. So, for example, the best thing somebody can do is reduce sugar intake. Sugar intake is the absolute worst thing you can do for your health and for your longevity. It is absolutely the worst toxin that we put in our body. And all sugar, doesn't matter what sugar it is. Some sugars are worse than others. Unfortunately, fructose, which you get from fruit, and the high fructose corn syrup is the worst for aging. But if you're going to have exosome therapy, cut things like sugar out of your diet. Try to reduce alcohol. Try to reduce smoking and other drugs. Listen to your healthcare provider when it comes to nutrition. Nutrition is absolutely key. Reducing cooked foods. So burnt steaks, toast, biscuits, all of these things contain sugar, but they also contain these things called ages. And what they are proteins that are cross-linked by sugars that are inflammatory. So in the United States, what most people don't realize is that the obesity problem isn't necessarily a caloric imbalance. It's all the crap that we eat. It's the ages that are causing inflammation. So that obesity isn't us storing energy as much as it is our body responding to assault, to injury, thinking it's injured. And the body's natural response to injury is to make adipose. So you're chronically injured, you're chronically inflamed, and the body is chronically making adipose, trying to respond to this onslaught of sugar and ages all the time. So listen to your healthcare provider, make sure they're taking a holistic approach, which means diet, exercise, and perhaps they're applying some peptides as well. Again, I'm not a physician, I can't recommend that, but talk to the healthcare provider. If they've got a comprehensive approach, you know they're probably onto it. If they just want to charge you $10,000 for some random exosome injection, or they may even be calling it stem cells, run for the hills.
Okay. And so in terms of what we would look to exosome therapy today for, there are the things we talked about. So burns, diabetic ulcers. So these are like significant injuries, but also on a healthy aging program, we could say for immune modulation, just for addressing that inflammation, what you're talking about. And we know that inflammaging, one of the 12 hallmarks of aging, is what's driving the ship here. So if we can reduce that, we can at least slow things down, if not reverse them completely.
Just think of it as heterochronic parabiosis, using the youngest tissue, the amniotic fluid, not the plasma from plasma exchange. Think of it as heterochronic parabiosis. You're taking those young signals that the body needs in order to maintain its youthfulness.
And just remembering the term heterochronic parabiosis and practicing it on a regular basis is a brilliant exercise for your brain and everything else. And so, and also joints, and brain, right? So it's all information. This has been so fascinating. Okay. So looking back, what was the moment that's been the most defining in your career, and how has it shaped your current work? I mean, if anybody's been paying attention, I think they know, but.
Yeah, well, I had a couple of amazing moments in my career, especially the first one being the discovery that we can culture expand the hematopoietic stem cells. That was huge. Then my second main observation was that we could induce repair in a heart, a mammalian heart, when we have so much cardiovascular disease in this world because the adult heart doesn't repair. It cannot repair. Mm-hmm. But the heart retains this small window of ability as soon as you're born where it can repair injury. And I discovered, and that's what led to the American Heart Association Prize on the cover of Circulation Research, a way to extend that window so that we can repair the heart over that period of time, which means, again, it's possible. If it's possible in nature, we can do it in adults. We just haven't been able to pursue that research any further yet. But really, the most defining moment was when I realized what aging was. As a regenerative medicine biologist, I was always interested in aging, but it was always on the back burner. Older people get sicker faster and all those things. We knew that, but we didn't really delve deeper into the question. And so I realized that if I want to understand how to fix things that are wrong in the body, I need to understand how they get wrong. And the clue to how they get wrong is to understand the aging process, because that's how everything gets wrong. So I had to understand aging. And so I spent a very long time in a theoretical space understanding what aging was, and studying other scientists and everything. I realized I felt they were all wrong. It didn't make sense that we weren't making any progress based on their theories. And so I went back all the way back to the beginning, to the Big Bang. And I'm not even joking, to understand then that aging is driven by entropy. And it's a long story, and it's in my book and everything that hasn't come out yet. But that was my biggest defining moment, was understanding aging is driven by entropy. We need to understand how entropy is metabolized or used or manifests in the body. And once we understand that, that is going to be our key to aging. And that has completely redefined my entire approach to everything that I do.
That's amazing. All right. Legacy and impact. What legacy do you hope to leave in the field of regenerative medicine and longevity?
Well, I feel that we're already sort of moving in that direction. I get letters from, NFL players that, I can't mention any names, but, they're featured on the news that they've had serious injuries and they've recovered faster than anybody can understand. We don't understand how this superhuman athlete is recovering faster. Well, they're being treated with our products. I get letters from people whose lives have been changed with autoimmune disease, and now they get their life back. I've had letters from their kids saying, thank you for saving our mummy, and things like that. that's an ongoing legacy where I feel like I'm making a difference already. People whose limbs would have been removed, and now
Mhm.
have maintained their limbs. But really, ultimately, I want to see through the X Prize. I want to see hopefully some research dollars come in for our scientific research, not just our clinical side, so that I can find that switch. That is my ultimate goal: is to find that switch in the human body that does exist, because we know it exists in nature, that will allow us to control the aging process. And I feel that if with the appropriate funding, I feel like I know where to look now. I know where to look. It's not just about entropy. That's the start of it. But I know where to look now. I know what questions to ask. And if I can get that funding to do that research, I feel that my legacy will be that we can pause human aging.
That's wild. Well, guys, you're listening. If any of you out there is in a position to fund this kind of work, we're going to tell you where to go. All right. Dr. White, where do people find you? How do they find your work? And if somebody's listening to this and feels they would like to avail themselves of the I'm not sure if you have a clinic or
we have a cosmetic version of the product. It's called PSF003, but the trade name is Lilium. And so that's a topical cosmetic that we have available. And then the medical products are going through clinical trial and IRB approved studies currently. We're in the field of dentistry, we're in the field of wound care, across the board. So if anybody's interested in that side of things and would like to do a clinical study with us, we're certainly open to that as well. So neobiosis.com is our website. Liliumpure.com is our cosmetics out branch. And then, of course, I'm happy to talk on LinkedIn or at any of the conferences I'm presenting at.
Amazing. So we'll put all that into the show notes. And so the topical cosmetic is available now?
Yep.
Oh, okay. We'll have to talk about that. All right. Well, this has been absolutely the most fascinating episode this year. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we finally made this happen. And we're going to have to do this on an annual basis because there's no way you're standing still and there's going to be new things to talk about all the time.
Yeah, hopefully. I'm excited. That'd be great.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again.
Yeah.
And have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much. Take care.